the second wave of feminism. So the first wave was all about suffrage and the right to vote. Coming to the second wave, you need to remember that more than action, the main focus here was theory. You need to remember that the main focus was theory, as in they were trying to understand the underlying discourses, assumptions, and belief system that society accepted at that time with regards to gender and their idea about gender differences. So now this had its origins in the 1960s. So you can call this a 20th century phenomena. And here we can see a formulation and dissemination. Dissemination as in spreading of a new ideology. And that would place feminism in the context of dominant discourses. So they picked up all the dominant discourses of the day. Discourses as in different theories, theoretical underpinnings. So all those were taken up and they were examined with the help of feminism. So Betty Friedan, she can be called the mother of the movement. So this is an attempt at analyzing the social institutions and to arrive at a common paradigm of patriarchal subjection of women. So they were looking for, you could say, common grounds, looking for common pattern, formula that was there in society. You can find a kind of a pattern when it comes to culture, when it comes to tradition, when it comes to rituals. So they were trying to unearth that and lay bare to the public. That is, it was a pattern like men working outside the house, whereas women taking care of the family. Then again, women reduced to certain roles and responsibilities, and how language was used in a particular way to justify what was happening, whatever was kind of meted out to women. So they were trying to analyze all these things. So they're trying to unearth the underlying patterns of discrimination that is embedded deeply in the meta narratives of society. So when you talk about marriage, you talk about childbearing, or you talk about dowry system, you speak about the kind of kinship and kidship, that is the kind of relationships that are there in society. Everything has some kind of an underlying pattern. And when you look at all these patterns, you can understand that everything is patriarchal in nature. So the meta narratives in society. So you, whether you talk about kitchen politics or whether you talk about what is happening in the bedroom, what is happening in the public sphere, in all these narratives, we find that there is a systemic as well as a systematic subjugation and discrimination of women. So they were trying to unearth these patterns. So now what did they do? The second wave of feminism. So, looking at the activities of the second wave, we can find that it was an intellectualization and theorization of women's issues. So, they were trying to create theory. See, when you want to reach out to a lot of people and you want to convince people, you need to have an argument. And any sound argument is based on theory. So in third year, when you start working in your project, you'll realize how important theory is. You cannot have or you cannot say things in the air just because you feel like it. That's not how it is done. So if you want to argue in favor of or against something, you need to have a theoretical backing to that. You need to prove something using a strong body of theory. So now women, they understood that if they want to talk about their experiences and what was happening to them in society, they had to theorize their experiences and whatever was happening around them. So this was that phase wherein they were using their intellectual input and they were trying to create discourses that would support the feminist movement. So in many universities, they started offering women's studies as a subject. Earlier, it was not there. So even now we have gender studies, which is a more inclusive area. So all this has been possible because of the activities of the second wave. And there was also a commission appointed by President Kennedy at that time to study sex-based discrimination. So all this shows that the thing was already taking effect. That is, whatever their activities, it was showing fruits, that something good was coming out of it. So they were busy with this consciousness raising activities. They were trying to disseminate information, telling, making people understand that this is wrong. This is not how it should be. So in practical terms, what was it? It was nothing than coming together and sharing of personal experiences of gender-based torture and experience. So there were all these women's collectives gatherings wherein they would come, sit down, and talk about it. So when more women interacted with each other, they understood that is irrespective of class, caste, gender. I mean, sorry, not gender. We're talking only about the female experience here. So race, class, and other political underpinnings, whatever, women were more or less experiencing the same kind of thing. Even women from aristocratic families, women from the lower strata, women from the middle class, they would come together, they would narrate, they would share their experiences, and from that they understood that more or less women all over were going through uh, different shades of discrimination. Maybe in educated families it was comparatively less, like everything was kind of relative, but then it was happening. So they understood that there was an underlying pattern and they had to do something about this. So now they try to intervene through theories. Intervention, as in, they wanted to set it right. They wanted to make a difference to whatever was happening. So they started theorizing of the feminist attitude to the various structures of society. They started reevaluating earlier women writers who were forgotten. So it was kind of a resurrection of old forgotten women writers, and and they also started questioning the canons. Canons are those, you could say, sacrosanctly held beliefs that about classics or how something should be written, who were the greatest writers and things like that. They are the canons. Canons tell us that as to who is a better writer, which is a better manner of writing, how something should be written. So they started questioning all that because they found that most of these canons were in favor of the male writers. They were considered to be masters and great practitioners of literature. What about women? Even if there had been one or two writers here and there, they were not given the kind of attention that they deserved. As a result, many of them were forgotten. So now these feminists, they try to dig out and bring back to memory those old and forgotten women writers. So when they were doing this, it also led to the emergence of a new poetics, as in a new kind of literature, that is kind of a rereading. Those books were there, but then they were forgotten and then gone from the public memory and public consciousness. Now by digging them out, what is happening, they were giving rise to a new poetics of rereading, reinterpreting, trying to understand. And also there was a profusion of poetry written by women. There was a lot of writing by women, and they were trying to deconstruct all the traditional criteria of evaluation. Deconstruct as in break down, and then forget all the structures and rules, everything. Thereby they could approach any literary work from any perspective. That is the kind of deconstruction they were doing. And then they try to investigate all these systems of philosophical thoughts and history. Why in investigation? Because most of these systems were put in place by men. So now they were investigating and trying to understand whether these systems of philosophical thoughts and history were also discriminatory in nature. They were trying to analyze that. So now this movement, it embraced the multifarious aspects of community life. That is, they wanted to look into the arts, the craft, music, and then other aspects of community life. Community life as in all kinds of institutions. You talk about education, the performing arts, even the things happening in the house. So everything that is a part of a culture was examined in light of theories. And we're going to talk about some important people, their contribution, and some seminal works. Seminal as in landmark books, works that these women published, which have gone on to become classics. That is, if you are studying feminism, you will be acquainted with these titles, because the whole foundation of feminism as a theory has been laid by these works. So, first we'll be talking about Betty Friedan. We had already seen how she is considered to be the mother of the movement. She had written this book, this work, a path breaking book called The Feminine Mystique in 1963. And what is she doing here? She's trying to counter, as in answer back, the media image of women in the post war era. So now, what happened in the post-war era? See, during the World War, what had happened? That was the time when women came out into the public sphere. They started working because of societal, economic compulsions. Because during the war, many men they went away to the front. They got killed. Many men were killed. So there were families without a male member. So when you have this kind of a situation, obviously women would be forced to go out of their homes and start working. So many women had started working, and that working group of women had led to, you could say, a kind of empowerment, as well as a normalization of the working woman. So they started enjoying that life in the public sphere, becoming a part of the whole social narrative. All that was there during the war years. They were also given a lot of importance, because without that, the society wouldn't have run. Society would have collapsed. So they took up that responsibility, and they did a good job of it. But then what happened was, after the post war era, what happened? Many of these soldiers who were injured or whatever, they came back, and all the men who were away at war, they were all back at home. So now when the men came back, what happened? The women, they had to now get back home. They had to sit at home and take up the responsibility of cooking, cleaning, doing the dishes, taking care of the children, whereas men, they assumed that mantle of mastership, which they had enjoyed before going away to war. When the men were away, women took up that responsibility. It became kind of the ones who ran the house. But now, with the coming of men, women were again relegated into the interiors, as into the kitchen and into the domestic sphere. But then what happened was, media during that time, newspapers, it was also the time where you have that black and white pictures and all coming in, advertisements, those kind of things. It started glorifying this new idea of a woman as an angel in the house. That's a terminology used for this kind of women. So this very pretty nice wife whom you can go back to, who will cook the best dinner for you, will take care of the family, keep the family together, and then will be the perfect companion, the perfect partner, the beautiful trophy wife. So many magazines, many shows, many, you could say, commentaries, advertisements, they all started glorifying this kind of a image of femininity, which was held in high esteem. So now what Betty Friedan did was, she tried to expose this. So she tried to expose this media image created by the society, patriarchy, and then she called it a domestic trap. It was a domestic trap that was set up for women. And then what happened was, because of this, what happened? Now women, they lost all the economic clout. That is, when you are earning, you obviously will have power, because you have that power to buy, the power to bargain and negotiate. Men, they enjoyed it all these years because they were the earning members. They were the ones who had all the property and wealth to their names. Women did not have that, but now they had experienced it during the war times. But now again, they were relegated back into the insides of the homes. So now what happened? It had an economic fallout, as in they lost that power. They lost that commanding power, that ability to bargain, the ability to buy. So now there was a relapse into the old mode of domestic felicity, and wherein education and career were considered to be secondary or not at all important for women. So again, the domestic felicity was given a lot of importance. It was upheld by the media as that a particular or you could say that high point of being a woman. So now she tried to expose that. She was instrumental in founding this national organization for women, which fought for the civil rights of women. They worked through a lot of legislative lobbying, that is, through the elected members of the parliament, through litigation and public demonstrations. Again, she founded the National Association for the Repeal of Abortion Laws and led the way to the legalization of abortion. If she wanted to abort, she could go ahead and do that. Earlier, it was not allowed. And the underlying assumption is the ownership of a woman's body lies with her. She has the agency as to decide and do what she wants to do with her body. Another very important name in this in the second wave is Simone de Beauvoir. Simone de Beauvoir, her heartbreaking book called The Second Sex speaks about how women are relegated into secondary positions everywhere. So it's a phenomenological analysis. Phenomenology is actually a kind of psychological understanding, getting deep into the root of something. So it's a phenomenological analysis of patriarchal structures of male dominance over women. And then she is one of the first ones to speak about the difference between sex and gender. And she says one is not born but becomes a woman. We have already seen this, right, in the first year and all. Sex is what is the biological entity with which we are born, and gender is the socio political, religious, cultural construct into which we all are molded into. Sex differentiates, that is your ability to reproduce or the way a particular body is, you could say, built. So, being a male and female with different sets of hormones, different bodily functions, and I mean, different organs and different functions. That is sex. Whereas gender is something culture teaches you, your tradition, your religion, all these things mold you into a particular gender. So, because of this, what happens is women are deprived of their potential and she is oppressed. She is always seen as the other. So there is this concept of reductionism, as in the other. So she is othered, whereas male is seen as the standard, and it is against this male standard that you have the other, that is the female. So she says that she is defined as in a woman. She is defined and differentiated in relation to man and not he with reference to her. You always say husband and wife, Mr. and Mrs. So if you're talking about husband, the wife has her identity with respect to the husband. It's not the other way around. She is incidental, the inessential as opposed to the essential. So what is essential? The male. He is the subject, he is the absolute, whereas she is the other. That is how she is other. That's why the title of the book, The Second Sex. So it's again a very path breaking book. So when you look at all these works, you can see that how they are actually theorizing what was already there in society, already what was happening in society. So now they're giving it a proper, clear kind of a proof with their writings that this is how it is done. So they could see a systemic as well as a systematic subjugation of women in all the meta narratives of society. Another writer of importance is Kate Millett. Kate Millett and her work, seminal work, Sexual Politics, is to be remembered here. And Sexual Politics was actually her PhD thesis, which she later developed and it was published and became a path-breaking work. So, wherein she says that there is this relation of power between man and woman. So, whenever you have one group dominating over the other, it shows some kind of a power equation. And when this dominance continues for a long time, what would happen? It would become an ideology. An ideology is that which is accepted by everyone without any question. So if you have your father sitting there in that easy chair and watching TV and or reading newspaper, and your mother slaving it out in the kitchen, after coming back from the office at 6 o'clock in the evening, and would have got up at 4 a.m. in the morning, all that points finger at this kind of an ideology, as in the man is more important or whatever. But and the kind of work that he does is given a lot of importance. So over a period of time, it has become institutionalized, it has become normative, and we don't question it anymore. So now she's questioning all that in her work, Sexual Politics. So there is common presence of power, which is manipulated to subjugate women, and it leads to an ideology over a sustained period of time. So just imagine if all the homemakers, if all the women, they would go on strike and they refuse to do whatever they are doing at home, what would happen? The society would collapse, don't you think? You talk about Adukla and Aduklakari as secondary or not at all important, but then that is very, very important. It's because of their work that we all are able to work outside and achieve professionally the heights and goals that we are doing right now. Because the whole machinery has been oiled by the domestic work done by women. She openly denounces the misogynistic aspects of Freudianism, misogynistic as in anti-female, anti-woman aspects of the theories of Sigmund Freud, the great celebrated psychoanalyst, and she analyzes the portrayal of women by male authors. So she tries to look at all the male writers who have shown a very, you could say, biased portrayal of women through their characters. And this lady, Kate Millett, she was also an artist. She was a painter and a sculptor, and she made use of visual media to draw attention to this grave problem, that is, this inequality of power between the male and the female. So he's saying there is this politics being played out in every sphere of life between man and woman. And it is kind of a manipulation. And this has happened over a period of time. And when it goes on for a long period of time, we start accepting it as natural and normal, which is not the truth. We need to remember other names also here. You have Shulamit Firestone, whose work, The Dialectic of Sex, again speaks about the subjugation, the discrimination of women. Then you have another very, very famous name, Germaine Greer. She wrote this very thought provoking work called The Female Eunuch, wherein she's speaking about how women are desexualized through the middle class myths of love and marriage. What is this middle class myth of love and marriage? Wherein every girl is taught to believe that marriage is that ultimate aim of her life, and the moment she gets into a marriage, her life's goal is accomplished, and then she can settle down. But then what happens after that? She is bound in chains. She is trapped. She's trapped, wherein her life becomes a long list of domestic chores. She's doing all these chores, and what happens to her? It becomes kind of compulsive in her, that she becomes worried about it, having to cook in the morning, or she becomes obsessed with that. So you might have seen this in your mothers. I mean, some of you, wherein they are obsessed about cleaning things and keeping things in order, cooking, and even they tell the daughters, if you don't do all this, and when you get married, what will happen to you? And if you don't know anything, people will blame me, yes or no. So these kind of statements, and these women, what are they doing? They're actually playing into the hands of the patriarchal system, wherein they are domesticated and they're trying to pass on the same domestication to their daughters. So now what happens is these domestic chores, it can become compulsive and anxiety producing activities, and finally she becomes desexualized. So uh, this object of male fantasy before marriage, this beautiful girl who is all wonderful, and he dreams about this beautiful, those erotic fantasy, whatever. But after marriage, what happens is she gets into all these domestic chores, and finally she just becomes like a machine. And when you have somebody working and going about the activity like this, she forgets about her own self, her own beauty, whatever, and then she becomes desexualized. That is, she's no more considered to be beautiful, or what do you call, attractive sexually. She just becomes a wife or mother. For instance, you have like women. It's the same idea that is behind these heroines. Now things are changing. That is, after marriage, their market value goes down. She's no more considered or considered to be attractive, or even beautiful, yes, but then not that very attractive or available sexually, because she has already got into that marriage seal or that wedlock. But this doesn't apply to the man. So even if he is married 2 3 times, or even if he is 50 60, he's okay. So you find these kind of differences in the way society views men and women once they enter marriage. So once you have that sindoor, that that tikka on your mom, that seals your fate. Then no more would people kind of look at you, or you're just considered off the market, that kind of a thing. And then you have other ladies and their works. You have Sheila Rowbotham writing Liberation and the New Politics, then Juliet Michel's Women's Estate. And there's another interesting event that happened during the second wave, that was this protest against this Miss America pageant. So, like we have even today, you have many women's agencies that raise their voices against these beauty contests and fairness screens and things like that. So that started during the second wave. So you have there was this protest against Miss America pageant. Then this led to the formation of Chicago Women's Liberation Union in 1969. So this was also the time when this whole women's liberation movement was gaining momentum. That it is becoming more and more prominent, and more people were becoming aware of it, and more than men, women were jumping into the fray, because they thought, okay, this is what is happening with my life. Even I agree. It was kind of a Me Too moment for them also, when it came to the kind of gender disparity, discrimination, oppression, suppression that was happening in the name of gender. And these are a list of some of the major achievements that happened during the second wave of feminism. So they began with all kinds of catchy slogans like "sisterhood is powerful," "the personal is political," etc. So all this led to the passing of certain very important landmark acts, like the Equal Pay Act of 1963. So that is, for the same job, both men and women should be paid equally. Then you have 1967 Executive Order for Affirmative Action Rights to Women. That is again giving more rights to women. Then you have Women's Educational Equity Act of 1975. That is opening up educational institutions for both men and women, giving equal rights for education to both men and women. Equal Credit Opportunity Act of 1947. That is, if a woman applies for loan, her application cannot be rejected on the grounds that she is a woman. So she should have equal credit opportunity, just like that of a man. And then Pregnancy Discrimination Act of 1978. Many companies, they tend to discriminate against pregnant women. They are asked to leave from jobs. Many agencies, many organizations, they would very discriminatory towards pregnant women. Why? Because when you're pregnant, obviously you will end up taking lot many leaves, and then later you need the maternity break, and then again later you will have a small child. So again, the possibility of more leaves. So what would they do? They would keep away from women, and they wouldn't give any importance to or they would be discriminating the pregnant women. So you have the Pregnancy Discrimination Act, which says that a woman, just because she is pregnant, cannot be discriminated against in terms of any opportunities. Then again, illegalization of marital rape. Earlier it was said that it is okay if you get like raped by your own husband, because you're already married and you're in a wedlock, but it is not accepted. It is actually a crime. That is, if a woman says no, the husband has to respect that decision and then act accordingly. But if he forces herself on her, then it becomes marital rape, which can be penalized. The husband can go behind bar. And then again, legalization of no fault divorce in all states of America. That is equal rights to men as well as women filing for divorces. Earlier, all these cases, or what all these divorce cases or divorce laws were in favor of men, but now equal opportunity. And the last one, there was this law passed that required the US military academies to admit women. Earlier, it was only a male bastion, women were not allowed. But then they opened the ranks to women also. So, when you're looking at the second wave, we are looking at this whole group of women who are trying to create a base for their further activities and actions. And for that, they had to understand what was happening. And they were trying to do that by intellectualizing the whole experience, the whole movement, which led to the writing down, the putting down on paper many theoretical arguments. So they are the ones who actually built a strong solid foundation for the feminist movement by means of all these seminal works like The Second Sex, The Feminine Mystique, Sexual Politics. So today, as a feminist or as a student of feminism, when you're talking about anything, be sure that whatever your arguments be, you can trace its origins or root to these works, without which you cannot have feminism. So, this was a very important, you could say, stage in the whole feminist movement. And before we go on to the third wave, we'll again be looking at certain ideas, philosophical underpinnings of this particular wave, wherein women, they were trying to define and see or talk about what a woman is, what a woman's experience is. So we'll be talking about that in the next class.